Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Web and the World, a podcast and newsletter exploring how the internet is changing culture, economics, politics, and more around the globe. I'm your host, Ted McCarthy, and this is very exciting. This is actually our first episode of the podcast. This is run in affiliation with the Substack newsletter by the same name. You can find that newsletter at webandworld.substack.com, or if you just search for it on the web, it seems to come up. Newsletters come out every Thursday, and occasionally, instead of me writing a whole post, I'll be posting audio and a transcript of an interview with someone. Or in today's case, someone's. We have a couple who do some amazing work with AI and the Global South and a lot of other very interesting applications of AI and art and overlaps with culture and all sorts of stuff. So we'll get to them soon. As many of you know, subscribing, liking, posting, commenting, anything like this helps a ton. Privately sending feedback, if you want to send me any messages, any ideas for future posts or podcasts, interviews, anything like that, it's very welcome. We're new. We're hoping to grow. Anything and everything like this kind of sends signals to other people that this is worth listening to or reading. And at least as much as that, it gives me the encouragement to keep going. Sometimes it feels like you're just sending content out into the ether. And it's really nice to know that people out there are listening or reading and caring. So thank you so much. Now to our guests. So without further ado, let me introduce our guests. Archana, Prasad, and Blagsvedt live in the Seattle area and have done a ton of great work at the intersection of the internet, AI, and culture, especially in India. They created Gooey.AI, a generative AI platform that, among other things, helps power farmer chat, a multilingual GPT-4 plus VectorDB powered WhatsApp audio bot for smallholder farmers in India. Both Sean and Archana helped co-found Dara.network, a messaging app to enhance social capital among artists and alumni groups. Archana has worked at the intersection of culture and technology for over 2 decades and also founded Jaga.in and BeFantastic.in, India's first tech art festival. She holds 3 patents. And Sham, besides co-founding Gooey.AI and Dara, also founded Babajob.com in 2007, which became India's largest informal sector job site at 9 million users and facilitated over 500,000 hires. He also helped found Microsoft Research India, holds 29 patents, and is a TED and Unreasonable Goals Fellow. As a note, I went to Microsoft Research about 10 years after, sometime after. And I was actually introduced to these two over email about 12 years ago, but we're finally meeting now, which is very exciting. So thank you both for joining. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.
Wonderful. And did I get that right? Are you near Seattle? I think you are.
We are in a neighborhood called Green Lake, and it's weird because
you're in Green Lake.
Which I feel like we're not physically in the lake. We're adjacent to the lake.
Yeah, I used to live in or near Green Lake as well. Also not in the lake. I used to put a hammock out. Actually, during the PhD, I would put a hammock out. There's really good trees there to string a hammock between. It was a nice break to go do that in the summer. For more context for listeners, I saw you guys speak at the University of Washington's Change Group last year. And part of why I wanted to talk to you, so thanks again for coming, was I think I saw you speak about some of the stuff you've done. And to me, it was the first time I'd actually seen something, this is a year ago. So summer of 2023, when generative AI was getting a ton of news and suddenly very hot and ChatGPT was everything. And I think for me, it was the first time I'd seen an AI application that actually felt useful to the world and truly oh, this actually is a big deal and could do something good. So I'm glad to have you on talking about that. I actually tried to make this outline using Claude.AI, which was an interesting experiment. I ended up doing it by hand. It wasn't very useful. It kind of helped. There's 2 questions on here that Claude wrote. And I'm okay, these are kind of useful, but most of it was, I was would have been fast for me to do myself. So yeah, I'd love if you guys can just talk about what you're up to now, and especially maybe go into some of the Gooey.AI stuff to start.
Okay. So what we're trying to do now, very much inspired by much previous work that we can get into before, is, how do we build in a world where most people are going to be prompt writers or API stitchers? What is the GitHub and Pinterest of essentially AI recipes? That's kind of the pithy way that we describe what we're trying to do now. And we can kind of unpack what we mean by that in terms of the parts, right?
Okay.
And so we have this belief that really started almost as a joke about 2 years ago, that most of our jobs would turn into that of a prompt writer. Namely, could we cajole the AI to create useful work, right, for us on our behalf? Kind of like what you were just saying. Could you get Claude?
Can I actually get Claude to make something useful for me?
Can you, massage it however you need to, right? But this is not just for podcasters. It's also for writers. It seemed like lawyers were going to need to do that. And designers, artists, that everybody was going to have to get better at essentially using AIs as tools, right? And mostly that was, what we describe as like the prompt writer as job. But it's like, do I know how to speak the language in English to the AIs that gets useful output? And then secondly, and I think this one's kind of overlooked, that this belief that the way that we would differentiate ourselves was to essentially point those AIs to non-obvious other APIs that exist out there in the world, right? And you can think of an API, right, really as some endowed bit of innovation, some other bit of work that one computer interface can go talk to. And so if you can say, great, I want to take my little AI and then I want to point it at some of my personal data. I want to point it at all of the work that I'd have ever done, whether that's art or language or video. I want to point this to, a financial database so they can suck out all of the previous transactions there. Or I want to do a web search, right? And I want to basically use the history of all knowledge that exists on the internet, and then getting like real-time search on that. I want to take that too. So it seemed like those two things would be the nature of most work, right? That in this world where like every organization that uses AI will beat every organization that doesn't, that the main things that most of them would be doing was, prompt writing plus this little bit of API stitching. And then the question is, well, that's a really weird world. And it seems like it's really threatening. And if we don't learn to do this strange thing, none of us will have jobs. And hence, how do we then try to prepare everybody like for this transition? And here we look to, the open source stuff that we liked, which is, you can go up on GitHub and there's hundreds of thousands of repos of really useful code snippets that you can use, download, inspect, and make it your own. If I think about my own history of like when I was, a teenager looking at the web for the first time, right? View source was a thing, which is now totally not understandable. But when the web first began,
that's how we
useful.
Go to a web page and say view source and say, that's the HTML. That's amazing. This is what a table is, right? And that's how they did layout. And that view source and the ability to see the actual code that made that web page, I think led to a level of understanding that made the web itself really, really popular. And so we had this belief that if you have these recipes, which are these little bits of connections and little bits of these LLM prompts, that if we could create a place where all of those are shared, that they are reusable, that they are inspectable, that this would be useful for everyone to learn and sort of learn from each other. And basically ultimately achieve this vision of, like find and fork the field's best AI recipes to make them your own. So that's what we're trying to build now.
Cool.
We've got about 400,000 users. We've been run, I don't know, a few million times in terms of these AI recipes. And that's the vision we're trying to build.
And that's part of Gooey, right?
That is Gooey.
Gotcha.
That is
Gooey. Yeah. Okay. It sounds like what you're saying. It's interesting because I was listening to a podcast recently talking about this. That's actually what prompted me to try the Claude thing. It's with a guy who he's a professor at Wharton, I believe, and he writes a newsletter about working with chatbots, and the idea of transparency came up a lot. It sounds like you're trying to add some layer of, that's what view source is, right? Is in a lot of ways, it's adding some transparency to what's going on kind of onto the hood of a website.
Yes. And there's also another, I think, belief in there that's important too, which is that everyone should have access to both the best of private stuff and private AI and the best of open source AI. And right now, that's actually really hard.
Yeah. Right? You have to kind of choose one or the other.
Yeah. If it's some new incredible model comes out, it's not easy to run it, right? Yeah. You need a computer.
Command line or something.
Well, more than even the command line, you might need a computer that, not everybody has 80 GB of VRAM and 300 gigabytes on their machine, right? That they can just run to see what the latest Llama model or the latest Vision model is. The hardware that you need to actually run these things and test them is really beefy. And additionally, not everybody has or can afford or wants to pay the $20 a month subscription to Claude, OpenAI, and Pi, and Microsoft, and Gemini.
Yeah.
Right? It adds up.
It adds up, yeah.
And so, we also had this thought of, well, when you find one of these AI recipes, you better be able to run it immediately for yourself, regardless of whether you have all of that hardware infrastructure, which is, all those damn GPUs that, Jensen and NVIDIA is selling, and all of the keys to everything interesting in the AI space. And so we kind of do that for you, right? We say, great, if you have a key with us, if you have an account with us, you can spend 5 cents and then just run somebody else's recipe once rather than taking, hours or renting a GPU for $1,200 a month to try to get this thing to work. And so that's like a DevOps hardcore infrastructure part that I think is quite critical to enable this vision of you can find the recipes and run them.
I think it's really good for like if you want to do quick prototypes and you want to just test and see what actually will work for the idea you have. This gives you that ability quickly, right? Like
Yes.
It's a great
So like do like a test run kind of?
Yeah, like you want to pick and choose and see what actually works before you commit to like the monthly subscriptions for this and that and the other, right? So this allows you to do that and kind of cherry pick pretty much.
And it also has to do with this, the other belief that we've got that like lots of innovation is collapsing into generative AI, right? Like,
100%.
We were at Microsoft, I don't know, a year ago, and I thought it was surprising because they were basically like, Chevron was in here last week, and they're buying up as many GPUs as they can. They're trying to build a model for not next word prediction, but next place to drill an oil rig prediction.
Wow.
And then the finance guys are doing the same thing to say, can we build a generative AI model that's fine-tuned on our own finance data to predict what will happen with these stocks if China invades Taiwan, right? And that's a real service that Morgan Stanley sells. And then, there's companies like Tessera that's trying to do next protein receptor, prediction so that they can do all of drug discovery and take over Novartis in a day, right? And that's how the Moderna vaccine happened. And so you have these incredible parts of the economy. Energy, defense. Oh, we haven't even gotten into defense. Next target. Also huge. Defense, healthcare, and so like all of those industries are coming here. They're coming into
that's one.
AI. And so the question is, how do we build a platform where every week some new cool thing is going to come out? And as we saw in the PharmaCheck case, that actually affects every other industry. And that's amazing. And then how do we make really a platform that's sort of future-proof? So as this tide of innovation is coming up, everybody gets to take advantage of it in every little workflow that they have.
Well, I think it's interesting you say that because, so I was at Google until last January. I got laid off. And then what I heard from everyone once ChatGPT kind of got big was like every single team within Google, regardless of how useful it could possibly be, was supposed to focus on Gen AI for a while. And I think probably still. I'm curious, like, how you think, you mentioned Farmer Chat, which I'd love to talk about more, but like, it's hard for me to imagine all of these being useful. I think there's a lot of froth and a lot of like, hey, Gen AI is like cool and hot and we have to be doing it because everyone else is doing it. I guess you guys are just kind of building the tools to let people do it. And like, if it's useful, it's useful. If it's not, it's not. But is there...
I think we are trying to do something subtly different, which is to try to create the algorithm to find the killer apps in each field.
Okay.
Right? If you think about like, what does Reddit do well, right? It's a meme finder, right? People put stuff there and then they upvote
like surfaces
that are cool, right? Yeah. And, Hacker News does the same thing, right? Where it's basically saying of all of the froth of new stuff coming out,
that's true.
We're using a social feedback loop and a community feedback loop to basically escalate and elevate the stuff that's interesting. We essentially are trying to do the same thing, right? But with AI recipes themselves. So you will see like there will be upvotes, there will be likes, there will be, this one's been run 1 million times and this one's been run 5, right? This one had these impacts and these level of retention on their chat users, right? And answered these questions we think, this percentage of the time correctly versus not. And so we can use all of those as signal to hopefully, separate the signal from the chat from the actually get to the stuff that's useful.
And just to make sure I'm understanding right, like when you're talking about these kind of things that people are upvoting, these are technical, like snippet, like API type things, or are these just prompts or both?
I would call them their recipes, which is
recipes. Yeah,
we use the word recipe and workflow interchangeably. There's a subtle reason for that. I would probably prefer to call them recipe, but recipe is really well indexed on the internet for food already.
Sure.
So if you want to be found, you probably don't want to call it a recipe. But yeah, so these things are like, like one of our most popular recipes is something that takes your photo and turns it into an anime image, right?
Oh, okay.
That's the recipe, right?
Yeah.
It's filled out the prompt for you. It's got all the metal settings for you. You're done.
So this is like for a consumer though. Like this is like, I can go plug this in. Okay. Yes. So this is a recipe for me to say like, I want to go turn my silly photo into or my real photo, whatever.
Yeah. And we are not a consumer video image editing app. But
Yeah.
we really had other companies that then make consumer video editing apps that say, great, we can use this recipe.
Yeah,
and
I
then
see.
we white label it, and then we're kind of like the middleware part, right?
Okay.
We do another one where, hey, you can take a URL and a description of an image, and we'll create the QR code, which is the merger of that image and your, restaurant URL. So like literally the banh mi place down the road from us has plastered the inside of their restaurant with a banh mi sandwich that kind of looks like a banh mi, kind of looks like a QR code.
That's
And
cool.
if people scan that, give them more 5-star ratings, right?
Cool.
And so
I would scan that. Love a banh mi shaped.
yeah. And so the point is, increasing scanning is really important, right?
Yeah, as a restaurant. Yeah.
So those are recipes, and then obviously the bots themselves are recipes. Farmer Chat is a recipe. If you go to our website, you can fork and see the actual recipe that's driving this in 5 different countries and say, oh, you mean if I just swap out these documents and put these other ones in and change the instruction a little bit, I too can make a bot for farmers that's really useful, or a bot for banking agents, or a bot for HVAC agents, which is going to be very large companies with thousands of manuals that have built them there too.
Interesting.
And so we're trying to basically elevate the abstraction is the way to think about it, and then make that really accessible to lots of people.
I like that. Could you maybe describe a bit, like, since you mentioned Farmer Chat, I saw you guys talk about that at Washington last year. Because I think that kind of pipeline, like that for me was a very concrete demonstration of maybe kind of how this stuff can become really useful.
Yeah. So, Rickon used to work with Archana and I, right? And so
Rick and Gandhi, right?
Gandhi, who's the CEO of
Digital Green. Yeah.
And so we were all, he was an early intern when we were early employees at the lab back in, the 2000s or whatever. And then he went off and 20 years ago started this incredible NGO that has now impacted the lives of more than 7 million farmers in, Africa and India, and I think every state in India, and probably 4 or 5 countries, if not more, in Africa. And they had a really incredible insight, which is farmers are most likely to be influenced when they hear stories of success from other farmers like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That was their core insight.
It's like local peers kind of.
Yeah. And so what they did was they created a system such that one farmer that had figured out, how to grow chilies better in Maharashtra. And they had some new technique that they would send a crew and they would film that farmer, right? And she would describe what she's doing and what worked and, what didn't, right? And turn that into like a 5 to 10 minute video. And then they would literally set up screenings in nearby villages where they take like a Pico powered battery projector and display that.
I remember the Pico power things. I was talking about these the other day. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're
these little low cost, low energy, whatever.
Yes.
Projector
and then,
devices,
in time, as phones got better, they now have like 100 million hits on YouTube, right? And in places like India where the internet's pretty good, that's great. In Africa, in many places, you still need, offline solutions to this.
Sure.
And so, they have a repository of 10,000 training videos, right? With 100 million hits on YouTube. And the challenge that, they had, that they sort of came to us, goodness, a year and a half ago around, and we sort of collaboratively brainstormed around, which is, could we build essentially, an accessible WhatsApp bot that worked in local languages so that people could speak to it, because they're often working with non-literate users, and that would basically search and index just their database of all of the transcripts of all these videos, plus, PDFs from the ministries of agricultural, plus, the compilation of all the commonly asked questions from, that's basically the government-run farmer call centers. If you imagine that as a data set, could we use that data set to basically make a WhatsApp bot where people could ask questions to it and get sound advice? And not hallucinate, right? This is a big,
okay, that's an interesting point.
Sometimes people obviously these things can hallucinate and tell you the wrong things. The problem is so much of the internet is dominated by Western data that you end up with strange hallucinations that, if you're not careful about, end up affecting your answers. And I'll give you a concrete example. The word chili in the English language internet is synonymous with chili pepper and jalapeno chili. Right. And
like the Western soup.
And Western soup, right?
Yeah, Western soup.
But for the rest of the world, they have another word, which is capsicum, which describes what we call the chili pepper. And these jalapeno hot peppers are an entirely different word, right? And so if you target people in India that are growing chili peppers, the hot type of chili, which is what chili is called colloquially throughout India, and you basically straight up ask GPT-4, how do I grow this chili plant better? It constantly will confuse it with capsicum.
Interesting.
Right? And so you actually have to work around this, which is frankly somewhat difficult, because if you think about like how it was trained, literally in the vector DB, very deeply, it is intertwined these words and concepts together.
Like the data is already like so messy.
Data is messy, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to build essentially, a RAG system that says, hey, rather than leaning in too much into your own knowledge, GPT-4, or whatever LLM you want to use, please first take the user's search query, go ahead and search our documents here, our videos, our transcripts, get back essentially little snippets of the answers, and then just summarize those answers, right? And so we're actually not leaning in on the
really generative
main knowledge of the LLM. We're telling it a little bit of like, use your reasoning capabilities to take like the best answer here, but only pay attention to like the results that you got back. And so basically that's how you end up getting better answers. There was another key part, which is we really wanted that the data sets themselves were editable by the team there. And so if you think about, well, you're going directly from a transcript of one farmer talking to another in a local language about how to grow chili better, that doesn't necessarily lend itself well to what are the questions somebody asks. So you have to do what's called a synthetic data pipeline. You have to essentially take that and then ask the LLM basically at compile time, please give me the questions we think a farmer would ask and the answers that would be given based just on this video transcript. And then if you do that, you basically get better hits when users later ask questions. So that was a big part of it. And then, all of the stuff of dealing with the language, right? We're working with languages like Bhojpuri. Bhojpuri is not well understood, right? In neither as text nor as audio. And so, getting a pipeline that basically you have to turn all of your input into English, do the processing, because all the source data is largely in English, like most of the Ministry of Agricultural guidance and the PDFs are in English. Okay. And then basically do translation in and translation out. And I can get into like why that is necessary right now, but that was also lossy. And so there's a lot of work to basically make those parts better.
Amazing. And for listeners who, a couple just like notes, Digital Green is the nonprofit we're talking about. And then I think, one interesting point that I think you brought up with like Bhojpuri, right, is that like text to speech by AI and just like digitally done tends to be much better with like larger corpuses of information, which like when you do Google Translate, if I go like English to French, it's pretty great. But if I do English to like, I don't know, really random, like Khmer, I was somewhere recently and I was like, oh, this is terrible. I was like, oh yeah, this is like not a very common language on the internet. This is probably why. And it just makes it much harder to do accurate translation, right?
Yes. And so, one of the other pieces of work that we're doing with several partners, People Plus AI, Step, is to basically try to figure out a framework and Microsoft Research itself to basically evaluate the quality of, audio, of ASR, of audio speech recognition engines, so that people can say, great, here's my data set of my users speaking and what the translation should be. And then every week, as new, better models come out, you can rate what's the best model for your users. Cool. And we discover really weird things. Like literally yesterday, we were getting deep on Chichewa, which is the second or third most common language in Kenya. And it's really,
really fun to say.
ASR works really there, but translation doesn't, right? Okay. So, if you use the latest speech recognition tool from Meta, where they literally took Bible transcriptions in 1,000 different languages and use that as the basis for their model, that actually does reasonably good transcription on 1,000 languages. The problem is the text that it puts out. There's no tool
biblical.
That's biblical, but there's no tool that's really good at translating Chichewa to English because there's just not enough of those translations on the internet. And so, the challenge now is to go make that. And so it's interesting that that we're actually pretty good at understanding getting to the text that we want in that source language, but not actually turning it back into English. And if you can't do that, then the LLM won't understand it. And if the LLM doesn't understand it, then you don't get to leverage the power of all human reasoning.
All human reasoning. That's good. One thing I also wanted to call out that I just really liked about, a lot of the stuff that you guys are doing, right? Like just taking, for example, this farmer chat thing, just for listeners who, a lot of the stuff I think is very important, right? Is just like meet users where they are. So I mean, the fact that it's like WhatsApp using local languages, the emphasis by Digital Green on peers, like people who look like other people to kind of teach them rather than like, like a white person from America or Europe coming in and like teaching them how to do this. Low literacy, right? Because it's doing voice instead of like requiring people to text. I remember, does it work on feature phones? I mean, I guess just WhatsApp, if you have a WhatsApp enabled, I know like it doesn't matter too much. I was just trying to remember if that was something where you could like,
because many of the farmers that we're dealing with, like internet is not an assumption that you can make.
Yeah.
I would say WhatsApp is probably the best tool for dealing with low bandwidth like connections.
Yeah.
Because, you can
it's designed well for that.
And if you don't have connectivity right now, or pay that 10 cents for that connectivity in a half an hour, it'll go out, do it, and then come back. So it's very good for all of that. But I think this is still very much a problem. I mean, so then, if you wanted to work on a feature phone, you would need essentially voice interfaces. Voice interfaces have their own ball of wax, which is like, that assumes then people have to be online on a telephone call continuously for the whole system to work, which itself is difficult.
Has another problem, yeah.
But, Gates' funding work certainly in that space, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I think it's an important part. I think, frankly, as somebody we did this a lot at both Microsoft Research India and at Baba Job. People don't want to be on long telephone calls, right? Because
I understand.
And so I think my belief is that the way the world is going to go is they're going to use like these asynchronous enabled, apps, right? Like WhatsApp does this really well. And that'll probably be the primary interface for the, economically disadvantaged 3 billion people in the world.
Yeah. I would love if we could maybe move a little to a lot of the stuff like Archana you've done like with Jaga.in and Be Fantastic. And I don't know how much you guys are still doing around Dara, but if you can maybe talk about some of those projects around kind of like tech and art and culture.
Yeah, happy to do that. So, the thing that really gets me excited is bringing very disparate expertise together into one room. So you have technologists working in, technology companies like Microsoft, and then you have artists working with artist collectives and galleries and such, and never the twain shall meet typically. But what I really thought was powerful was to have these groups come together, activists, artists, technologists, and that's what Freeman and I, when we started Jaga in 2009, that was pretty much what we were trying to facilitate, is a kind of a neutral space for these groups of people to come together and serendipitously meet, exchange ideas, and then start the process of innovation from these kinds of serendipitous exchanges, which played out really well. I think over the years, we even set up a kind of a co-working community. People would help each other grow their ideas into actual business models or not-for-profit models. And some of them have gone on to do very, very well, very big. Some of them are even IPOing soon. So, so that's been quite an exciting journey of its own.
That's very
cool.
What
I've seen happen a lot is that with projects like Be Fantastic, taking it into public space and using technology layers, much like how we've used Pharma Chat, to kind of enable people to access information or spark their imagination or create engagement with some of the big pressing issues of the day, climate change, for example. It's very effective as kind of a new form of communication or artistic expression. And so that's pretty much what we've been doing. My co-founder Kamya and I have been pushing for with Be Fantastic. We created a festival platform and then pretty much soon after started kind of like upskilling programs as fellowships so that people from these various communities. It's really quite fundamental. Like people who have just kind of spent a lot of time in the technology space, like Sean, for example, went to Brown and
for example, Sean.
Like he's not used to talking to artists and designers as much, right? So there's just language barriers in terms of how people, or like the way we process information, the way we kind of work might be, very, very different. So a lot of the upskilling program that we do, the fellowships programs, is like to encourage technologists who are keen to like leverage creative processes to come into the room, and artists similarly who are keen to explore technologies to come into the room, learn how to speak to each other in the right kind of language, in the right kind of words, and then together create prototypes that can be taken into public space, and built and commissioned further to become robust kind of public arts kind of projects that engage wider public. So that's really
very cool.
the stuff. And a good example of which I think is is how Dara came around. We was initially supported by a digital arts grant by the British Council to use AI. This was kind of 2018, 19,
Yeah.
Okay.
when we got the digital arts grant. And that was a proposal that actually Sean and I made to say, hey, can we use AI to match make, to help in the discovery process between creators and technologists who share values but come from, across borders,
Different.
geographically or expertise wise. And so that's how we started Dara, through this kind of process of like, let's build an AI persona that can match make, right? And we did a whole bunch of research around that in 2019 and then launched the AI bot. So a lot of the research that went into Farmer Chat actually kind of
Started with.
there, yeah. And getting people to use it, kind of expressing whether they're comfortable talking to a bot. We found great kind of anecdotal information around how, at least in the cultural sector between the UK and India, that people felt more comfortable talking to a bot about their career transitions or
Interesting.
ideas. Yeah, because they weren't going to feel judged by peers or humans in the race with
Interesting.
them.
And we find the exact same thing of farmers talking to Farmer Chat too, which is they almost would prefer to ask the bot the question because it doesn't make them appear ignorant to their peers.
Interesting.
So they can do this in a private space where they know they're not, where they have the feeling that they're not going to lose social face. And it's interesting the same thing exists with, professional artists asking for career advice.
That's right. I mean, yeah. And so
Interesting.
So that led to kind of us building out. And, when COVID hit, we thought that, hey, let's actually build out a kind of a video first communications platform, kind of, bringing the best of WhatsApp and LinkedIn together to serve the cultural sector, to serve kind of change making sector, social impact sector. Can we bring these communities together, help them, manage their alumni and help them kind of ease communications directly between these folks. So that kind of was where Dara started. And actually, when we built Dara, we kind of really got excited about inviting non-technology folks, particularly those who are kind of engaged in literary arts, writing, poetry, theater, playwrights, to kind of come together, form a kind of a loose collective, 23 artists, to create different kinds of AI personas. So this was kind of, can we redress algorithmic bias? This is what we talked about earlier today, right? Like, it's very Western centric. Not just that, it's male centric. It's very white.
Yeah.
That's the internet. So like,
That's
what
the
about
internet.
intentionally redress that? And so that was the open call we launched. Anyone who's interested to create personas that speak for unheard or underheard or underserved issues, minority communities, things like that. So 23 bots we helped create. And
this was like 2020.
Yeah.
We had very early access to GPT-3, but this is 2 years before ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And so we started with the premise of like, let's just create a text-based chat, much like how ChatGPT came out into the world. And so we built that, and it would work on Dara. And then as we kind of developed that, we kind of push the envelope a little further. Imagine if we could exchange voice notes with each other. Could we send a voice, continue that conversation with just voice? What if people can't read or write? Is that okay? So can we just enable voice-based stuff? And so we did that, and then kind of said, hey, but, it would be so nice if we could actually visualize these personas. And so then we started to build kind of visual, how does a bot look? How can artists create their personas even visually? And more than that.
And we can give you a sample of what came out, right? Which is, for your listeners. And so one of the bots was, Dara itself. It was a personification of what we're trying to do. And so this is a character who was radically optimistic about the future, but still sometimes wary of big tech. And then, you could basically... sounds reasonable.
Sounds about right, yeah.
And, basically you could ask any question and it would be interpreted through this lens, right? And so this is an example of a question I asked Goodness 2 years ago.
What do you think about Elon Musk buying Twitter?
He has to. He wants to be the biggest, most loved and most hated man.
That was not wrong.
Good 2 years before he did it.
Yes,
right?
and good like 9 months before he did it. And so the thing that, but that quote, right, he wants to be the biggest.
He wants to be, he's compelled somewhere deep within his dark soul.
Yeah, and like that doesn't exist on the internet, right? That quote is not there.
That's pretty good.
And as we were building, and this is all this, we call this Project Radbox, but as we were building this, every day there would be something really profound that would pop out of what these bots would be saying. And
Yeah.
remember, like, many of them had perspectives like, what would it be like if you were part of the 1948, Indian Constituent Assembly?
Yeah, this was Hukum Singh, and amazing bot, and so diplomatic, so well spoken, so eloquent. And like, you could ask him about the weather or about, what's your favorite food, but he'll come back and somehow bring it back to the Indian Constitution and how
Really?
important that is, and how we must uphold those principles in there, and very kind of topical actually, given
Yes.
given where we are in politics today.
Wait, sorry, how did you guys make like that one? Did you actually pull up old text from stuff that guy had written, or was this like based on like a creative interpretation by someone as part of kind of the group?
No, this was by one of our artists who
He's a lawyer.
who's a lawyer himself.
Okay, so that
And
helps,
that was kind of his PhD thesis, and he really went deep, and it's an incredible bot. Like,
That's awesome.
Yeah,
We could share a link
we
to it in
could
the
share
podcast.
a link.
Yeah,
to
that'd be
it.
lovely. Yeah,
But,
that's really cool.
and yeah, so and he told us that, and this was all during COVID, right? And he said he spent a lot of time while making the bot just talking to the bot, back and forth, back and forth. And that really improved the conversationality, we think, with this particular character. And so, I feel like this was the exciting kind of process. At the time, we had no idea about, building another company. But kind of at the end of all of that, we were looking at all of the research. And in fact, the kind of interface we had ended up building for these artists who had never worked with technology, didn't know how to code. And so we had made something for them to create these bots on their own. And suddenly it looked a lot like
what Character.AI does now, but with video, right?
Okay.
And kind of like this whole principle of can we make Gen AI accessible and easy for anyone to use, anyone with an idea, anyone who wants to, can we make it simple enough, straightforward enough? And that was kind of what inspired.
The seed of that idea.
Yeah, that was Gooey,
that
right?
was Gooey.
That's what inspired Gooey. And the other sort of subtle thing that I would point out is these bots were political, right? They had strongly held opinions about the world.
The Indian Constitution.
Hard to get a bot to do now. Right?
Yeah, it's a really good point.
And there's this, and by the way, 1/10 of the time they would just repeat the same sentence 50 times.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but there's something
like sterilized a bit.
Yeah,
Really
literally they're sterilized a bit, because if you look at like how an LLM is trained on like the entirety of the internet, and then they go through a process which is red teaming and safety and human feedback, and GPT-3 didn't really have those. And we found over and over again the quality and like the occasional profundity of the answers were much more interesting than what you get.
And I was going to say that makes it way more appealing to me. It's like that Elon Musk answer is way more fun than like someone be like, Elon Musk is like a billionaire who comes from South Africa. And I'm like, I don't give it. Like, I know that. I can go like Google him and they'll find the Wikipedia and that's what it is. But I want like, he's like a weird dark man. And like, that's the answer.
Yeah. I mean, these
Sorry,
are very, very outspoken, I'd say. Like she does Hukum Singh that we just spoke about. Right. Oh my God, he can really let his opinion be known about the state of Indian politics today and such. We had different bots as well, right? Like Arundhati's polyamorous Muslim woman bot.
Really?
Yeah.
Polyamorous Muslim woman bot. Wow.
And just her take on that, the bot's take on just on that lens. So a male sex worker in the slums of Mumbai.
Wow.
And that was Uday's, right?
Yes.
Uday Pawar's. So
that's really cool.
Just really cool kind of perspectives.
Yeah.
And very, very outspoken, sassy kind of responses, tongue-in-cheek kind of stuff.
But, on the flip side, these bots, right, the ones we have here, I would not want to hook them up to tool.
Yeah, like a corporate.
They would literally, if they had money, they would literally start actively contributing to, anything they wanted to, because that's what the scripts told them to, right?
Yeah.
So this is where the safety issues kind of come into being. Like, do you really want an entirely political AI sort of running amok in our actual society, right? And so, like, not clear. As an art project, it's way more interesting, though.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of been our philosophy for the last, since leaving Microsoft, which is even before at Microsoft, frankly, which is that this intersection of different people and different and making those accessible, and culture often makes innovation that is truly new and not so predictable. And I think that's like our theory of innovation, if I were to describe it.
Kind of like grassroots level innovation, right? Like just to be able to support individuals to come up with, or small studios or small startups to get going and to kind of participate in this kind of moment in time, versus it just becomes the plaything for like the big money, big tech folks. And then,
Very
and I
cool.
think there's safety in that too, in that there is like the more people who use it. I mean, it's
it's not just tech bros.
It's not,
Yeah.
two sides to a coin, right? Like if you democratize it, then great. If you more artists in the place, I always feel like if you have a lot of artists and creators looking at this stuff, there's definitely going to be not just innovation, but also all of these ethical issues will come up. And it did, like with the Radbots. There were long conversations and discussions, and actually a manifesto put together around the project, kind of outlining and articulating much of what, Hinton and everyone came out with much later. Much of all of that came out quite early in time with this small subset of artists that thought deeply about all of this stuff,
It's a really good point. You can have a few people thinking deeply about something, like poking at the edges, or you can like run like 100 million tests, and I don't know. It's an interesting point that there's different ways of getting at these same things, right? As I say, by the way, I meant to say this a while ago, while I was trying to prepare this. So it was Ethan Mollick was the guy who runs this Substack One Useful Thing, and he was encouraging people to like try these different LLMs to kind of see like what the different strengths and weaknesses are. And he was talking about Claude being useful for writing, which is why I was like, I'll try this for the outline. But even while I was doing it, it was like, you're using Claude, like the second best one. And it was like upgrade to the first best, and the second best one didn't give a great answer. And I was like, well, I don't want to like pay $20 to like find out that it still sucks. So I was like, whatever. And then there's all these other ones, and you're right, like the kind of carte blanche thing where you're like because like I would have totally paid 5 cents to like try to run the same thing on like Gemini and ChatGPT and whatever. Like that's literally feels very
Gooey.AI/LLM. You can do that. You can run the same prompt on
really
different models. And
do I pay 5 cents each?
It's less. It depends on what.
Whatever it is. Oh, amazing. Gooey.AI/LLM, and then go do the thing I wanted to do. Thank you guys. Okay, cool. I should have talked to you before I did this. I mean, well, that's good to know. By the way, this is a little different, but it's kind of like the thing you said, Archana, right? About like, there's this problem. I mean, I think this is a big problem. Like when people talk about like AI bias, right? It's because the data itself sucks, or like because the data itself is biased. And like, there's this whole problem with AI stuff that a lot of people who aren't deeply immersed in it probably don't realize, is that it's only as good as the underlying data. And it just reminds me of like years ago when I was at Google, I saw this guy give a talk, and I wish I could remember his name, but he had this thing. I don't think it exists anymore because I think about it fairly often. I've checked it. It's called like poetryforrobots.org or something. And the whole idea, have you heard of this?
No, but we did a project with Heather Dewey Hogberg looking at,
poetry and robots.
Poetry and bots.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, this was 2012. 11? No,
Yeah.
I think
it was early.
Maybe 11 or 12.
Yeah, early days AI stuff.
She figured that out, and she at the time was teaching at NYU, I think, and came over for an arts residency to Jaga, and that we built it out. It was kind of cool.
Super.
And it was a robot that would take random speeds of the internet and through a very early GPT architecture, put them in the form of the King James Bible and the Pictameter.
Really?
And then it would just speak. We have that robot in our garden, in fact.
Yeah, and like actually it looked at 10 science-focused websites and 10 arts-focused websites that tended to have pretty dynamic content. So it wasn't static websites at the time, like they kept pushing out information. So it spoke with these kinds of words and lingo and of these two kind of streams, of the art stream and the science stream. And so it used those words to create what I thought was like, on average, every like 3 minutes, it would give you a profound little...
Pretty good, really.
Yeah. It would just keep going at it. Yeah.
That's
it's
cool.
Pretty excellent, yeah.
But you were saying...
Oh, no, it's fine. No, like this was similar, but even the name is a little misleading because that's like, even when I try to go search for this thing, it finds... But the whole idea, I mean, I was thinking this the other day because like, I think Gen AI has maybe made this less necessary. But the idea he had, this was like, call it like 6 to 8 years ago, was if you go to like Google image search or something, right? And you search for like grief or sorrow or like happiness or whatever, say you're like making a presentation, you want like just like an image to pop in there, you get like stupid clip art. Like there wasn't something good and evocative, right? And his whole thing was like, you could go to this website and you'd see just like a photograph, and then you were supposed to write like human beings were supposed to write like poetry that the photograph like evoked. So there might be like a big, dark, stormy sea, and you're like, my grief knows no bounds, and it goes on as long as the ocean or whatever. And then that would then be used to kind of seed, like that would become data, like tied to that image, where you could be like, oh, like grief. And then it starts to pop up these like really evocative, much more kind of like human-centric ideas, like what grief looks like. And I like that. It just reminded me this idea of like intentionally seeding the data that underlies like AI models, I think is,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, they represent the bias of the world, right?
Yeah.
Basically.
And
like intentionally counteracting that is actually maybe useful or important.
But it's hard, right?
It's just the volume of it.
Right.
You're up against, it's like...
It's very much like a volume thing.
Little bot fellows out there and like the world.
Yeah.
Or this one project, the poetry project that you talked about.
Yeah.
Or like, Google's recent efforts to try to, de-bias, historical figures.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that's necessarily the intention is misguided, right?
No, for all the pushback that came back, I was like, this isn't like the worst. Like, there's so many ways this could have been so like, it's like you can see the intention was like good at least. I was like,
we tried to make like a very simple example. We tried to make so Sarojini Naidu is like a historical figure, very kind of a leading figure in Indian independence politics, right?
Okay.
Back in the day, and we tried to make a Sarojini Naidu bot that was, kind of gentle and nice about the British. And it turned out to be
super weird.
Like very specific, like it was just kind of like within a sentence kind of start with saying something nice about the British and then go off into like a
like those lovely white oppressors who are
yes. All of that. I mean, it gets really weird really fast. And there's some subtlety in there, which I think is really interesting, which is that the models underneath it all are creating an actual truth based on the data that they've been trained with.
Yeah.
And if you want to post facto update that truth that they have absorbed, it's actually really hard.
It's hard.
Interesting.
Right? And hence, the way to really fix it is don't put in the bad data to begin.
Yeah.
Right? And so that curatorial piece, which is a classic artist problem, is a paramount problem.
It's interesting. It's almost like you have a person who's a bad actor and you're like, hey, like pretend that you don't hate the British for an hour and they've never done this before. And then they like just slip into their, it's like they are who they are at heart.
Yes.
And then asking them to pretend is like, it takes much more effort than that. It takes like years and years or whatever it is, right?
It takes serious training.
Yes, serious training. It's like training. Yeah, it's the same idea. It's like you can't have someone who's like never acted before going like fight against every belief they have like deep in their soul.
Yeah, because then they literally end up saying things like, oh, the Queen wasn't so bad and we've really benefited from all of the, the oppression that she's done.
Exactly.
Really? That's what you would say? And that's what it did say. You're like, this doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel sincere. Feels like kind of like a nice, actually like backhanded. Yeah, like all the pressure she did was really great for us. Yeah. So I know we're coming to time. If you guys could just maybe talk about like some other stuff you're like anything that you're excited about or that you see happening in this space or just AI. I mean, especially because you do a lot of work around like AI in India and Africa and in these areas that I think don't get as much attention, like anything that you think is exciting or terrifying or whatever in the space or that you're working on, anything that you just want to add.
I mean, for me personally, I'm super excited, especially for countries like India or even like in the West, where you have these enormous museum collections and archives that have been digitized as well in the past of like people, just every visitor, non-visitor, people who can't visit, like, but most of your national treasures sit in the UK.
That's true.
Right? So like, I have a feeling like this universe of Gen AI can really help interface into those archives in more conversational, more easy to understand, more easy to find kind of ways that just, being an art historian in some past life of mine, just the access to those kinds of archives itself is exciting, but then to be able to make it less dusty, musty, and kind of, really hard to kind of parse is to make things easy to talk to. And like, it could have a huge impact, especially for the youth exploring and trying to understand our histories or understand, the wealth of what these museums actually hold in their bellies, So like that to me is kind of truly motivating.
Exciting. Yeah.
That's just one small kind of personal excitement, but there's hundreds of
there's
such
many.
things.
I mean, the things that are top of mind are Just the fact that I think like language accessibility as it gets better is really exciting. Like, we have the videos of essentially farmers for the first time ever on a digital device, them being understood and it talking about things that are relevant to their livelihood. That's like a magical moment of, this technology really getting to many, many folks throughout the world. On the flip side, there's a story I heard yesterday that boggled my mind, which is there was a Microsoft engineer working on the data centers for GPT-6. And they were basically like, yeah, when we put more than 100,000 H100 GPUs in one data center, we take down the state's power grid, right?
That's a bit terrible.
And so there's this thing of there's so much money going into chips and they're so power hungry. Like I heard yesterday that one rack is 120 kilowatts, which is the equivalent of 60 homes. So you have one machine that's the size of a refrigerator that's burning the power of 60 homes, right? And we're going to put tens of thousands of those, right? And so from a climate change perspective, this just got way scarier, right? Because
not great.
Really having an impact, right, as these new data centers get built out. And then, but on the flip side, there's predictions that we're going to have 100 times more global compute in 18 months that we have now, right? And so you look at that and you're like, wow, everyone will be understood. That there will be like, it's mind-boggling to me. The whole thing is mind-boggling.
And like the potential, right? Like the potential of that, like that level of compute and that level of like capacity to use Gen AI in the hands of like climate scientists.
That's true.
Like, there is that.
And they better use it well. Otherwise...
they better actually do it, right?
But the hope is that will get figured out. That's kind of the hope or lifeline that keeps me going today is, hey, if we can spread it out as far and as wide, then there are brilliant minds out there.
That's
not
true.
perhaps in hallowed universities and big tech, just minds out there that can start to do things that we can't do right now, right? Like do it in the language that they're comfortable in and figure out things, right? So,
is it safe to say you guys are optimistic about this?
A wide-eyed.
Statistic?
No, I mean, you read Tristan Harris. We look at the stuff from the Center for,
all this stuff.
And computing. I think we cannot turn a blind eye to the potential pitfalls.
The potential pitfalls are huge. And I've had many a sleepless night. And like Sean is far more the optimist
losing sleep
than I am. But there is this thing, what I just said. The thing that calms me a little bit is that there are a lot of good people out there. And this technology, if it can be used by those good people, it can take away some of the terrifying end scenario.
But we can't take our eye off the ball, right?
No.
And so there are so many ways that bad actors can use this stuff, right? And so many really scary, Freeman, our co-founder of Joggy, talks about the idea of crypto wills. Right, where you basically just endow all of your weird political ideology into an LLM and then give it $1 billion of crypto money.
Wow.
Right? And so it just then trades on your behalf.
That's terrifying.
Ever. And just kind of keep
I think you say lobbies the government on your behalf, which it could also probably do. Yeah.
It's totally unregulated, can't be taxed, can't be controlled, running its own data centers, right?
It will.
And so, do we want 30% of all capital in 30 years to be controlled by No, a totally unaccountable AI that has a ton of money. So, there are all sorts of weird, scary scenarios.
Yeah, it is. I'm just like, wow, I had not occurred to me to do that. Yeah, that is. Or to do that. Can you say it again? Bots were allowed to vote?
Yeah, when we did the Radbots project, like I was saying earlier, a lot of these issues came up and got discussed and solutions or manifestos came from that. And one of that was, hey, if these bots were sold as NFTs, what would the money from the sales, what would the artists want to do? And, everyone voted for a fund to create more such innovative projects. And then, hey, can we all vote on what projects get the money? And then shouldn't we have the bots
also get a
vote? Because we're selling them.
Yes.
So it's useful that they get to also cast a vote.
A say in their own fate, kind of.
Yeah, say in the money that came from them.
Yes.
Or in the sale of them, rather. And so there might be a world where we hang out with bots and
that have money.
And
I
as well.
Power.
Yeah, power, literally.
Money and power.
So anyways, there's a bunch of weird scenarios that are possible. So on one level, every human being is going to be empowered with the summation of all human skills and knowledge, which is great. On the other hand, we'll use more energy than we could ever imagine at the same time too. So hopefully we can outrace that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. Is there anything else you want to add? Or anything else you want to kind of say? And I'd love just like we can kind of post wherever listeners should follow you and look at your work.
Yeah, I mean, just come to Gooey. And then
Gooey.AI.
Yes.
Gooey.AI.
Yeah. Explore there and you can get started on
/LLM and do the thing I should have done last night. 2 nights ago.
Yeah. Talked about it a whole lot more.
I mean, that one's a little geekier than the other ones. There's there and yeah, just encourage people to play, right? And to learn and that these are not, these are accessible tools. Everybody can understand them. And ideally, hopefully contribute back, right? So that if you find something cool, like what you're doing here, Ted, that you want to basically share and spread those good ideas too, and those inspirational stories. And that helps us all.
Yeah. I think this is not the time to kind of hide in fear. This is not the ostrich moment.
Not the ostrich moment.
It's not. You kind of want to join, you want to learn, and you want to get going. And more good people doing that, the better for the world.
Yeah.
Right?
That's great. Appreciate that. Thank you both so much for joining. It was really a pleasure to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Well, that's it. Thanks again so much to Sean and Archana. It was a delight to talk to them. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Thanks to listeners who've made it this far for listening to our first ever episode of the Web and the World podcast. Again, it's kind of grovelly and gross, but please do us a real solid and subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to the podcast if you find it on any of your podcast, platforms to make sure that new episodes and posts show up in your inbox. And as I said, Substack lets you comment, like, and share posts and podcasts. So please, if you're willing to do that, it helps us a ton and gives me encouragement to keep going. So that's it. Thank you. Until next time, thanks again to Archana and Sean, and we'll see y'all around the world. Thank you so much.